So here we go. So moral turpitude involving children.
Yes. So speaking of moral turpitude, look at that first bullet. It says children forced into criminal activities and under behaviors. That's important because moral turpitude has to do with the child doing that activity. But remember, they're either encouraged or they're forced to do that. So that's important. So we've got to examine every area that violates that sentiment or accepted standard of the community. So that is important. Now, in North Carolina, when things are child welfare, it does include the parent, the custodian, guardian, or caretaker. So that person can be passive or active. And what we mean by that, so you can actively encourage a child to go sell some drugs and let's make some money for the house. You can actively do that, or you can passively not say anything and know that they're doing it. That's a passive way of doing it. You can also passively not say anything that your child is not going to school. That is, that if that child is not going to school, that's not going to be, that's just a passive type of example, but not necessarily moral turpitude, but active or passive is one and the same when it comes to moral turpitude, because either one of them will work. So let's go back and let's look at moral turpitude again. Actively telling someone that, yeah, go sell the drugs, or passively, I know you're doing it, but I'm just not going to say anything. So there are also criminal acts. Anything that's moral turpitude is normally a criminal act. You're kind of sort of forcing that child into some criminal activity. Let's think about what that example may be. Criminal act, selling drugs. So someone type into chat another criminal act that would involve a child that you've seen of that could be possibly moral turpitude. Selling drugs is one. What may be another criminal act that you could maybe force a child into? Sex, exactly. Absolutely. And I know Angela Stokes, I'm telling you that this is not new to us. This is something that has happened. People have sold their children for sex, or they have said, you know what, go ahead and make some money, have some sex and make some money as long as I'm getting a cut of it. So that certainly is one of those things where it's a criminal act. What if you said, you know what, take this bag over to Johnny's house and he's going to give you a package? That would be another one. You manufacturing the drugs. There was a child that was on my caseload years ago when I was doing frontline work, whose brothers forced him into making the little marijuana bags. I mean, that was his job. And if he didn't do it, he got beat up. So, and the parents knew that that's what was happening, but they didn't worry about it because they were bringing the money home. So that's just to name a few. So Angela came up with sex. Is there any others? Because there's many more. Yes, theft is one. Brianna, thank you. It is a huge one. I don't know if anyone has any examples or not, but if you have any examples of where they've used children to steal, I have several of those. I would love to hear if anyone would love to pick up the mic and tell us about any other ones where it included theft. Recruitment for sex trafficking, yes. Angela, can you tell us about that? Thanks, Angela. You have the mic. And you're unmuted on my side. You're unmuted here, but I don't know if your computer's unmuted. And Angela, if you cannot speak, if you don't mind certainly telling us an example that you may have in chat. And as we go along, okay, it's not working today. That's quite all right. Would love to hear one of the examples. Brianna, do you have an example by chance that you would like to share?
So I years ago I took care of a child, and that was something that his father would do, is they would go into the store together, and he would say, you need to steal this, or you need to take this. And he was, maybe about 5 at the time. And
Wow.
um it's just, it kind of desensitizes them from the early age to, about what's right and what's wrong. And as parents, we're supposed to be the ones teaching them. And so I mean, this child eventually was put in foster care. But yeah, I mean, I guess that's one of the examples that I have.
That's good. Thank you, Brianna, for that example.
Yeah.
We really appreciate it. What do you think moral turpitude does to children? What are some of those effects of moral turpitude?
It affects them mentally. Oh, wait.
I can hear you now, Angela.
Angela.
Yay. Okay, say it again, Angela.
Long-term mentally.
We can hear you.
Yeah, I said it affects them mentally.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It does affect them mentally. As Brianna mentioned, just to hear the person who's supposed to be the father, that you should respect and listen to, because they are your guide, to say, go steal this, go steal that. Certainly is going to eventually have some effect on that child mentally. Absolutely. Thank you, Kevin. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think we're on the right path. Remember, when we looked at the analysis of the definition, it's really the question we put on the table. Example, for those of us that are parents, we raise kids or been working with children and families for some time. Their children are born with a sense of not just vulnerabilities but innocence. And so as we are trying to guide and shepherd them to appropriate positive behaviors in community, that begins to create a rift in the mind, the heart, and the spirit of a child, emotionally, physically, spiritually. It impacts the holistic person. And so when we encounter, and you all can think about it, just put yourselves in these shoes for a minute. When you encounter something that you believe to be real, like Santa Claus, right? It's too close to Christmas. I'm sorry, gang. It's too close to Christmas. I love Christmas. So the first time, maybe some of you didn't grow up with that belief, but pick any belief to where where that belief started to be tested, and it puts you into an ambivalent conflict. And so when those ambivalent conflicts are in constant flex, because when children are learning to break the law, there are so many positive reinforcements out there in their social circles, family, friends, school, other providers, other people, just expand their universe a little bit, that are teaching them the exact opposite of what their parents, their caretakers, guardians are forcing them into, either passively or actively, to do these criminal acts. And so in that sense, it begins to split the person in two, right? Now they're beginning to, as they form identity, as they individuate, the deep, and I love what I'm seeing in the chat right now from Louis. It blurs their mind conditioning, their cognitive development is exactly right. And we know from brain science is it literally at a young age, at any age, it begins an identity split. And so if you're coming at it from a clinical perspective, here's where we see the onset of trauma. We see the onset of some antisocial personality characteristics. We see the onset of, unfortunately, multiple personalities that begin to form. Also, there's a lot of the recent research in regards to bipolar diagnostics. A lot more children are being diagnosed with bipolar, and we as social workers, as therapists, as medical providers, wherever you're at in this profession, when we're intersecting with these children, we have to remember that their minds are learning, and this is what they're learning. And so that mind map, those hard conditioning factors about reality and society, they're already on the pathway of in negative light, where they're constantly living in a catabolic state. And so when you look at the deep impact that forcing children into criminal acts has, this is why this topic is incredibly important, and why Dee and I really wanted to bring this to the table, because this, honestly, this is something that's overlooked. Unless you hit the big ones like human trafficking, prostitution, direct manufacturing or selling of drugs. But it's the little things. The little things create a magnitude of force wave when it comes to the development of the brain, the emotions, and the spirit.
Oh, thanks, Kevin. We appreciate that. And thanks, Louise and Brianna and Angela for responding. We appreciate that. All right, let's get back at it. So there are some things, Kevin, when I was in the training room, for 17 years, I did pre-service training. And when you're doing pre-service training and there's an unconscious incompetence, like people just don't know what they don't know. So when you mention moral turpitude, people think everything. But let's talk about what it is not. It is not, in terms of our law, moral turpitude is not what you say contributing to the delinquency of a minor. Even if it does contribute to the delinquency, that's not what it is by the law. So when we're looking at how we're going to screen these, and it's important that we understand that and we put these in the correct category, very important. So contributing to the delinquency of a minor is one thing. However, moral turpitude, they're two separate things. Contributing to the delinquency of a minor is not moral turpitude, and moral turpitude is not contributing to the delinquency of a minor, although they certainly can be part of that. So smoking marijuana with your child, honestly, now I'm going to be out there a little bit. Kevin, I saw that. Thank you. I'm just going to tell everybody on here, and I just have to be real. I just don't see myself smoking marijuana with my children. So I'm just going to put that out there. And for me, if I had to make a judgment, which what this is, I would say that it's morally wrong. But thinking about the law, and that's what's important, that's what we have to tell everyone that we talk with, is that we have to separate our values from the law. So in North Carolina, if you're smoking marijuana with your child, it's not necessarily moral turpitude. It used to be. It was happening.
And it could be.
And it could be, yeah, absolutely, it could be. We would add some elements to that, but just alone, in terms of looking at the statutes and looking at the ways that we screen, may not necessarily be smoking marijuana with your child. Drinking with your child, come on, let's take a shot of bourbon. Not necessarily moral turpitude, but a lot of people would think that that was morally wrong. And that's why sometimes it's really difficult to teach moral turpitude, because the morality is in contradiction sometimes. What if you say, you know what, you guys stay home. I know you're 15 and 16, but I'd rather you drink here. Oh, there's lots of, Kevin, am I right? Raise your hand in the chat or say something in the chat if you've heard this many, many times that, you know, you're allowing your children to drink in the home, and there's been lots of conversations about that. Say something in the chat if you see that, if you've heard that.
And Dee, I just want to share, I just want to share from my personal, family religious point of view, is that my family practices a lot of Jewish culture elements, and so it's fairly normal for me to be with other Jewish families on Shabbat, and their children are allowed to partake in wine.
That's right.
My children have been allowed to partake. Now they don't get, they're not allowed to have like giant glasses of wine or things of that nature, but as a part of the representation and connecting to our spiritual journeys and our families and some of our cultural circles, that those are the areas that I would really strongly recommend we stop and we think and we remain objective and ask, why is this happening? How is it happening? And then we go back to the board and we really lock into what are the impacts on the child in regards to pro-social development in our communities and within our family systems.
Right. Thank you, Kevin. Which is the reason why when you are screening, it is important to ask cultural questions. What Kevin just gave you was part of the family's culture. Extremely important to ask those questions. And that's why it's important to set aside values and to really get into asking those questions. Kevin, that was an excellent example of why it's important for us to ask cultural questions when we're doing intake. If we do have some information or we do get intake about moral turpitude or anything else for that matter, very important. Thank you, guys. Next slide. All right, so Kevin.
Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, when we do our lunch and learns or any of the trainings, we do a deep dive into the academic literature to see what we can bring to you, because one of the pain points that we realize as practitioners, especially in child welfare, a lot of times is policy and practice don't keep up with the latest trends in really what's happening in the field. Like Ryan, you see Ryan's picture, but he's in the field right now. And Dee, part of Dee's journey was she was in the field. She had to come out of the field to help join today. So we all stay in the field and practice because that's what drives relevant training and relevant content. And so when we look at the literature and when we look at the statistics in regards to moral turpitude, and you do a keyword search from the academic journals, here's some of the elements. Number one, this is not a highly researched area. So when we're looking at the specifics on helping our industry to define what moral turpitude is in the realm of child abuse, because the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act here in the United States is what drives the indicator that this is abuse. It's how it's defined. And so every single state and jurisdiction that is connected to the US must and shall define moral turpitude as abuse. And so if that's the case, then helping us to understand objectively what are the connecting criminal elements that we can be looking for, what are the impacts, not just in the children, but in the family, but in the family systems work itself, because that really drives practice and practice standards and modalities in which we practice. 2 articles were found. I went deep. This is more than a 25-year search backwards. I only found 2 articles that were published. And those articles really summarized just in general, more of just some court analysis and with child impact. It gave some longitudinal impacts, but the number of families and children that were studied, the sample sizes were really small. So I couldn't conclude one way or the other, except to just encourage for those of you that are in school right now and you're looking for something to research, this is a great place to research. So I changed my key terms and searched and dug a little bit deeper and looked at the big factors, right? The things that are in that need attention right now that truly are familial children crises, human trafficking, children manufacturing illegal drugs, children selling illegal drugs. Here, I found more than 150 articles in the academic journals. And these were articles in both categories associated with child protective work, the articles from the APA, the American Psychological Association. There were some articles from the UK, articles from Canada. So this is a broad category that's been studied. Even I found some Latino journals that we're talking about elements from Mexico and things of that nature. So here we get a lot of attention in regards to what's found in the literature. I was like, okay, Kevin, so what did you uncover? All right, so Captain Obvious here, human trafficking is the most common. But did you know that it's the most common in the United States? I didn't know that. I was thinking that human trafficking was more in other countries. It was really surprising to me to see. And here are the states that have the most human trafficking grouping. So you have Florida, Texas, California, and New York. In those states, I found articles from 2021. So this year, like the latest one was published in June of this year, going all the way back into the 90s that had these states categorized. 1.2 million children at any given time are subjected to human trafficking. And when we define the term human trafficking for moral turpitude reasons, we're not just talking about sex trafficking. We're talking about labor trafficking. We're talking about distribution of drugs trafficking. Anything that ties back to those illegal elements of criminal statutes. 1.2 million children at any given time. Drug manufacturing and distribution, more than 10% of all child protective cases found. And when you look at the totality of child protective cases in the United States, we're looking well into the threshold of 500,000 cases every single year. 500,000 children at a minimum are reported, and those reports were screened in. So that 500,000 is just screened in reports. That doesn't account for, almost the 1 to the 1.5 million reports per year for child maltreatment. 10% of all of those cases had a direct finding of children that are assisting with the manufacturing or the distribution of illegal drugs. When I drilled down into assault, I came across an article just this year in regards to North Carolina. In North Carolina, assault rose 210%. This is child assault. And the connecting factors that I read in this article specifically, parents had knowledge that this was going on. And to the point that parents knew that their children were getting into fights, very serious fights, or they knew what the child's plan was to be in a serious physical fight. And by serious, these are fights that resulted in felony charges of the child. Parents knew, either active or passively. Parents knew. So it's really important for us to anchor into that active and passiveness of the parent. Stealing, home invasions, and burglaries. Okay, so this is an element where I couldn't find any relevant research that connects to the maltreatment. Now, if you look into the foster care research, one of the things that we see in the foster care side of what happens to children that remain stagnant in foster care or reunification efforts have been very poor. And so these children age out of foster care. In those studies, I found several studies describing some of the impact, and some of the impact on those children was criminality, was they got into burglaries, home invasions, car theft, things of that nature. And so there's some connectivity in the industry, but not directly tied to looking at just the assessment and the investigative side for child welfare, or in any of the categories looking at from a therapeutic perspective or a medical perspective, what these types of impacts would be if we studied it from those angles. All right. So that's the statistics. Anybody have any questions about statistics or have any interesting statistics that they want to share? If you do, throw it up in the chat, and we're going to use a couple of case examples. I have one and Dee has one to just kind of flesh out what this active passive behavior looks like, just briefly. Okay, so on your screen, you should be able to see the case of Warren here. All right, Warren is a father of 2 children. The children's mother died 2 years ago from a fentanyl overdose in front of the children. The children are 13 and 6. Warren struggles daily with alcohol and uses methamphetamine 2 to 3 times per week. Child Protection Services has been to the home at least 4 times over the last 4 years. Warren recently lost his job and is struggling to pay the bills and keep food on the table. His 13-year-old child has been stealing groceries and household supplies to help. Warren knows about the stealing and does not attempt to discourage his kiddo. The 6-year-old is starting to go with the 13-year-old to learn to do the same thing. So, question, is Warren actively or inactively encouraging his children to break the law? What do you think?
And remember when we talked about passive and active?
Is that one too obvious? All right, we got one inactive.
Thanks, Brianna. She has a question. She has a question mark beside it, so.
That's understandable.
Okay. Anybody else want to try? And if you need to see the scenario again, let us know.
Here, I'll flip it back onto the screen, Dee.
Okay.
There's the scenario. For those visual folks like me, can look at it. Give you about 30 more seconds to participate in the chat. And if you're driving and participating, do not be looking at your phone while you're driving, or your iPad or whatever device you have.
Right. Okay. Ryan says it's a serious case and fits into this category.
Okay, team. So yes, first of all, I want to congratulate and say Brianna is right. This is inactivity or passive behavior. And Dee, why is that?
It is definitely passive because he didn't say anything. He knew, but he didn't say anything. He didn't discourage it.
Yes, he knows it and chooses not to
Chooses not
stop
to
it.
stop. That's right. That's correct, Ryan.
Yeah.
Angela's story is heartbreaking, very heartbreaking. And a story that I've recently heard about in chat. She had 4 clients who were siblings, 14, 13, 11, and 8. Their parents, just in case anybody's driving, their parents, mother and father moved them from their home so they could prostitute them from the motel room. The kids were using for selling sex and drugs. And so they were using their children to make a living for them. And that's sad. And that's not the only story that I've heard. One recent story that I heard, there was a child that actually had a baby from the prostitution. And so they removed the child, but the child was 13 at the time. And they eventually put, when the child got old enough, they eventually put the child and the kid together, but the kid came from the prostitution. Really, really sad scenario. So that's why if we see something, we have to say something. And that is the reason why this work is so important for us, so that we can save as many as we can. Thank you for sharing that story, Angela. But here's the thing. Angela knows the story because we found out about it. Once we find out about it, we certainly have to consider how we're going to help the children and put things in place so that they are resilient and that they can make it into society after that amount of trauma. Thanks, Kevin. You want to go to the next scenario?
Yeah, we'll go to the next.
Okay. All right, so the next scenario, you guys ready for the next one? Oh, thank you, Angela, for sharing. So if you can read it, you can read it on your screen if you like.
Oh, that's Warren D. Hang on a minute.
Okay, that's okay.
Do you have your scenario? Let me pop out of here and go grab it.
I do have it. I can probably read it for you. I have to leave a minute to go to my document, but I can definitely get it. Would you like for me to do that?
Hang on, let me see if I can grab it over. I think I got it.
Okay.
Here we go. Is this one it?
This is it.
Oh,
All
yeah.
right. So, you know, when we're talking about child abuse, how do we find out about it? Well, through our intake. Somebody says something, there's a disclosure, however that is, we find out about it. So that becomes a screening process for us. So this one is, the reporter states that her neighbor's son, 17-year-old Johnny Taylor, was selling drugs on the street to help the family. The reporter notes that the mother has been diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer and is out of a job due to cancer and the pandemic. The reporter's son was at the neighbor's house and witnessed the mother tell her son that she does not want him to sell anymore, as she is concerned about him going to jail. So she did say something and she told him to stop. She did request that he take the earnings from those drugs, use it to buy alcohol, and open the basement as a bar. Since the bars are closed due to the COVID pandemic, she told her son that he could make more money and that he's less likely to get arrested because alcohol is legal. All right, so everyone type into chat how you would screen this report. Now, when we talk about screening, remember, you would have to say, is this moral turpitude or is it not? And would you screen it in or screen it out for the 17-year-old person? That would mean, is this something we need to look at? And is this actually moral turpitude? So depending on what state you're in, you may have a certain process in terms of how you screen. So let's type in the chat. Okay, Angela says it's moral turpitude. Let's see if Louise and Brianna, what they have to say. She says that it's moral turpitude. Anybody else in the chat? So let's talk about it. Angela, do you want to pick up the mic? And okay, so Ryan, you said interesting case from one type of moral turpitude to another. Okay, right. Okay, interesting case, good. Moral turpitude. Angela, can you pick up the mic and tell us what is immoral? What do you consider moral turpitude about this particular case?
Well, the reason I said that was because the mother, who was supposed to be the guide for the child, she is definitely giving him conflicting, not so much as answers, but you're telling him not to do one thing, but you can do another thing that's definitely wrong.
Right. Good, definitely wrong. Now, when we talk about now, alcohol is legal. So, what makes that moral turpitude? Somebody tell us, Brian or Angela, Louise or Brianna?
Because he's underage.
He is a minor, and we talked about that. He's a minor, and what else? What else about it? Now remember, Angela, I want you to think about the definition of moral turpitude. Kevin, would you go? It isn't legal for a 17-year-old to be selling alcohol. Good. Plus, you can't sell it out of your basement. Yes. Right. So all of these things, I mean, you're selling, yeah, alcohol's legal, but you're 17 years old. You're not even supposed to have it. You're selling it and how legal is it to sell out of your basement when you are seriously breaking the law by selling liquor, and then now you know that the child is doing it. I'm with Angela. You know it's wrong. She really did not want him to go to jail. She felt like, let's just do it at home and let's just do alcohol. It's legal. And I got you out of the situation, that was really moral turpitude. Let me get you into something that may not be, but it is, right? Because moral turpitude is about criminal acts. So that is illegal, and she encouraged him to do it. So
this would be a federal violation, D, not just a state violation. This would be a DEA violation.
Good. Do you guys know what made me come up with that scenario? Anybody have any idea?
Does that have to do? We have a lot of bootlegging here in Western North Carolina, D?
Believe it or not, when the bars closed, people started selling out of their home, and some people had literally their children behind, selling the beer and the alcohol, which is pretty sad. So that scenario hit me because of that. So thank you guys for that. You were absolutely correct. You all get golden stars today for that particular scenario. Kevin, back to you.
Thanks, Dee. Well, team, our time is coming to a close here. So Ryan just got finished up with what he was doing over in the field, and we wanted to share a couple of things with you, what's coming up and what's happening here at Real Academy.
Hey, thanks, Kevin. Yeah, so Kevin, Dee, can you tell where I am right now?
Yes, I can. You're in the county working.
So for our students that are on here, I'm actually in
you're in our Real Academy.
Yeah, I'm at the simulation house.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, and the reason I brought that up and pointed that out is because next month we're actually doing a lunch and learn on simulation in child welfare, like training with simulation. It's our core specialty at the Real Academy. I wasn't here towards the beginning of the conversation to know whether or not if Kevin shared any of that stuff, but we specialize in using simulation-based trainings that go beyond role play, that set the entire scenario with the environment, sound effects. We use augmented reality. We really just, we try to introduce some new techniques, even with VR, in order to help social workers get used to, so that's like the new ones, get used to encountering very difficult circumstances. We try to incorporate adrenaline as a part of it, because when social workers really go out into the field to knock on doors, visit with families they've never met before, not really sure what's inside the home, all those factors can ramp up those adrenaline levels. And so we try to do that in a safe environment. So if you're interested in learning more about our simulation form of training, next month's Lunch and Learn would be a great opportunity for that. So please follow us on Eventbrite and on LinkedIn, because maybe some of you had heard about some of these trainings through LinkedIn. And we regularly post about these types of things. Also, next week, next Tuesday, I'm trying to remember the time, Kevin. Did we? I can't remember. I have to look at the Eventbrite thing as well. But
it should be 10 to 12 Eastern
That's right.
Standard Time.
Okay, yeah. So 10 to 12, we're doing a workshop form of this training. So today's was really just about getting familiar, you know, kind of getting a little bit of a baseline, having some discussion, sharing some stories from different places. Next week's going to be more of a deep dive into some simulated cases where we will we'll really unpack things. We'll look at it from a screening decision, but then like what kinds of resources and interventions do we offer a family in these types of cases where moral turpitude is at play? Because you see, as some of these examples that Kevin and Dee used, they're using these examples from, like, you know, people kind of feel like they're backed into a corner. Well, they feel like they don't have a choice but to do something illegal to survive. And so what kinds of resources, what kinds of interventions can we use to help people so they don't feel like they've got to do that? So anyway, next Tuesday from 10 to 12, online again, and we will be doing that one on site at one of our local counties with a real team of social workers in the room. Isn't that right, Kevin?
Yes, we
Okay,
sure are.
so yeah, we did that last month with DV, and it was a rowdy group in the room. They were really excited, and they were very engaged. And so we'd love to have you all join us online as well. And if you choose to do so, you can use that discount code right there to cut down some of the cost of that workshop. You also get 2 continuing education units and a certificate from being a part of that with us too. So we hope to see you all there.